All right, so let's begin.
Why did you start working on Ultimo?
Because I had grown tired of Dungeons and Dragons. I had been playing since 3.5, and I like most of the iterations in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't like 4th, but that's not a unpopular opinion. A lot of people don't like 4th. And really what really struck me with Dungeons and Dragons was I like the setting, I like fantasy and all that, but Dungeons and Dragons sort of pigeonholes you into this high fantasy setting with these very strict classes. What you are is decided from the very beginning of the game, and I feel like that restricts player creativity, but it also makes the game feel really static to me. I know exactly how to play a fighter to make it numerically superior, so like it's either I nerf myself for roleplay, which sometimes I do because it's fun to do, or I am playing a game where I sort of know the outcome, and the only time that I lose is when fate deals me a raw hand. And I feel like that's not very fulfilling. And older versions of D&D made it feel less this way, but it really in 5th edition that's where I was sitting. And I wanted to make something different. My first thought was for the freedom of character creation. That's where I started. And I made what I think I still have it labeled on my computer as D20 classless, which is the very first version of this, which still used the D20 system because, it's open source, as much as the people who own that source, that license, don't like to admit, I guess. It is open source, so that's what my original plan was. And then I realized that I didn't need to use D20. After playing some White Wolf games, after playing Vampire, I got really into Vampire the Masquerade in the last few years. The video game more so than the tabletop, but it made me realize that there's different ways to do this.
That actually leads really well into my next question, which is what other games influenced Ultimo?
The two biggest influences on Ultimo are Kevin Cole's Space Kings and forgive me because I don't remember the man's name. It's Michael something, creator of Monster of the Week. I like the Powered by
Sands.
Michael Sands. I really like Powered by the Apocalypse in general, but Monster of the Week was the first one of those systems that I really got into, and I think it's beautifully designed, very simple. And I think what I take from there is that the danger in those games always feels real, whereas in D&D you can, and even Vampire the Masquerade, you can get really powerful and then it feels like other things can't stop you. And I don't like that.
So, can you just describe a little bit about how Ultimo works? Like, how do you play?
Ultimo is, in mechanics, most heavily inspired by Kevin Cole's Space Kings, Super Tri Studios. I'm a big fan of him and his and their podcast, Pretend Friends. And they were the ones that inspired me to say, I don't have to use dice. This doesn't have to be a dice game. And that was the biggest problem, because I wanted the game to feel fair. I wanted the game to feel like if you failed, it's your fault, not some nebulous dice roll or something like that. And Space Kings uses cards. Now, the way Space Kings works is really random. It even adds to the randomness. But Space Kings is a game that's meant to be played, a bunch of drunk friends who don't really, need to really know the hard rules. And while I love that, that's a great way to play D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. I like crunchier rule sets. I want it to be crunchy, but I want it to be understandable. And Ultimo works in a way that it's a little difficult to explain, but once you know it, it's very intuitive. It's a card system, and it's just about matching numbers of cards. The the player plays against the game master, which we call the dealer. The dealer plays their cards randomly, but much like if you were playing poker, the players get to see their cards, and they get to choose which cards they're going to use in their engagements. And their cards are sort of like a stamina system, a la Fallout or Dark Souls. Outside of combat, it allows people to have this huge freedom of what they want to do, because you just decide what skill and what attribute you want to use to tackle a subject, and let the cards decide what happens. Like if I believe like the last time we were playing, I had someone do an agility engineering check so they could to open a bear trap on the fly, in the setting that we've been testing it in, there's been a lot of, I love fantasy, so there's a lot of duels, sword fighting, and it feels tense. Combat in the game feels tense because it's always back and forth. I took a little bit from Powered by the Apocalypse games there, so it's not just you hit a guy and then on his turn that guy gets you. Engaging in combat is always dangerous. You can take damage from even attempting to fight someone. But people who are good at combat are really good at combat. But I wanted to make a game that focuses on a team dynamic that isn't necessarily everyone is really good at fighting and we fight together this way. And I wanted to make a different team dynamic. And this is funny because I said the two biggest role-playing game inspirations for this were Space Kings and Monster of the Week. But the two biggest inspirations for how I wanted the game to work are the Venture Brothers and Dark Souls. I wanted the game to feel more action-oriented. Your character is doing things, they get tired from doing things. You have to manage your hand size, or what we call stamina in the game. But I didn't want it to all be all combat. And that's why Venture Brothers is such an apt comparison. In the Venture Brothers, there's one guy who fights, really. It's just Brock. He is the only one who does any physical combat. But whenever something requires super science, you have Doc and Billy. And like the Venture Brothers, while incompetent, are detectives. And and I wanted the game to feel like that. If you don't want to be a warrior, you don't have to be. You don't have to be a wizard. You can just be a guy who's good at talking to people in like a genuine way. Just be a nice guy. Your character can just be a nice guy, and that's a viable character to play in these games. You can also be a frogman, because that's what another one of my friends has done. Freedom of character choice.
Yeah, I want to say that your description of evolving over time and like it seems complicated at first, but once you understand it, it's so intuitive. That very much matches my experience. I had a little bit of a learning curve, but I always do. And then, but once I actually read the rules, I got really into it. It's a lot of fun to play. So how long have you been working on it, and how has it changed over time?
D20 Classless I started working on almost 6 years ago, a little over 5 years ago. And then stuff got backburnered. I've worked on several comics and tried to get my name off the ground in other ways since then. And then just school and work and life and all this stuff. So it only in the last 2 years has it been a primary focus in my free time, but 5 years in total of work on and off.
And why is it called Ultimo?
It was originally called Dead Man's Hand, but there are two other RPGs that use that term, and it kind of pigeonholes it into a Western setting. And after about a couple hours of just shifting through different card turns, I had like Mortal Draw, and it was just very silly. And then I landed on Ultimo because in the game of Top Trumps, if you win with the lowest card possible, that's called Ultimo. I think that perfectly exemplifies the system, because in Ultimo, in this game, the thing you want to do is use your lowest card possible, because you always want to be saving your best card, your ace in the hole, for when it's desperate, when things are desperate. I think my friend who wrote the foreword in the free book actually basically says that.
That actually leads perfectly into my next question, which is, so why are you kickstarting the campaign setting? Why is the base game free?
Base game is free because I was a poor kid. I got into role-playing games because I didn't have a lot of money. So my best friend when I was growing up, he got me into Dungeons & Dragons. And we didn't have enough money to buy a set of dice. So we played with D6s. And just, like, we were like, this is as close to 20 as we're going to get. You rolled this many D6s, and that's your D20. That's how it was insane. It did not make any sense. We played like that for years, just playing D&D wrong. And then ultimately, as we got older, we had more money. We were able to actually start playing properly with the proper sets of dice, because they're not that expensive. But you have to remember, I've grown up in the American South, so role-playing games when I was a kid there was a stigma. So even finding a place to sell the dice was difficult. Thankfully that changed. Now it's really widespread, and that gives more people more opportunities to play these games, and gives me an opportunity to pitch this one. But that, more to the point, you asked why is Ultimo free?
Yeah.
Ultimo is free because I feel like it's just the system. D20 is free. The concept of D20 is free. You can, that, you can't take that, that's out there. What I've got out online for free, which you can go to my website, and I think by the time this is up, itch.io, and download, is just the system. No settings, no frills. You get to make whatever you want to make with the bare bones that I created. And I want, there's two reasons for that being free. Because I'm fairly unknown. Kind of feels kind of cheap to be like, yeah, just give me money. Without showing people what I can do. And B, I want people to see that the system stands on its own. These last 5 years weren't spent crafting a narrative and then cramming some dice rolls in to suit that narrative. This last 5 years were spent making a game system, from scratch, essentially, and something that you can make many settings in, and something I intend to make many settings in.
So, you've been working on, you said you've been working on Ultimo for 5 years. Mm-hmm. You've been working on Kings of the Heartland even longer, right? Can you talk about the campaign setting and the world that you've built? Yes and no on even longer.
I have been... Kings of the Heartland is the campaign setting that we're pitching. That's what we need money for. If I'm being frank, though, I'm going to make it anyway. The money will be just expediting the process. I'm going to do this regardless, because this is what I want to do. But it would help if I didn't have to work all the time to support this. That being said, Kings of the Heartland has been worked on in its current state for the past 4 months, but it is based on lore that I have been developing for, how old am I? 18 years. 18 years. Me and the aforementioned friend who got me into D&D, and another friend who was our second DM, all started working on the lore for this way back when, and it was utterly stupid when we were children, ripping off anime and I'm pretty sure our original map was just the U.S. but fantasyized, and of course we're adults now, so instead of ripping off anime, we're ripping off Tolkien and George R.R. Martin. Of course, this setting was originally written for D&D, so there were elves and dwarves and Rakshasa and fish people and beholders, and all of that had to go. And as I got older, I started liking that less. It's not that I don't appreciate weird, wild, and wonderful things. I just think there's a place for it, and then I think stories told with humans hit home more, because there's no one you can just point the finger at. There's no one that's like, oh, that's those monsters. Or in the reverse, that I know a lot of people nowadays, it's very common to be like, oh, the humans are terrible people who like burn down forests and kill elves. And it's like, we're all humans, so all of the atrocities that we've done to other humans. So I think it's important to remember that when you're telling stories. And the stories that I resonate most with are stories that are about people. Doesn't matter like what people, but people. And I feel a little detached from dwarves and elves and fishmen and Aarakocra and all that. The beauty of the system of Ultimo is that even if you play my setting that is very grounded in reality, well, not reality, there's magic, very grounded in humanity, you can turn Old King so-and-so into Frog Prince Fortescue like that. Just the rules account for it. So if you happen to like this thing that I don't, the system doesn't preclude you from that. It's literally a small shift. But as far as the setting goes, yes, I've been working on the bones of it for a long time. As far as the fine detail, that is most of what I'll be doing over the next 6 months if this Kickstarter is successful, or the next 3 years if it's not.
Yeah. So, why should people support the Kickstarter? What will you do with the funds?
The funds will be used to reduce some of my working hours, more time to work on Kings of the Heartland. There's been a lot of people playtesting this for years, and I want to give them some money. The person who helped me develop this lore, like, there's no way I'm leaving him out in the rain, and like, so part of it will go to him. But most of it will be going to keeping me working on this in a timely fashion. That being said, I'm going to make this regardless. So if you don't want to give me money, just wait 3 years and you'll still have it.
Well, what will they get if they do support you?
First off, obviously, if you give a requisite amount of money, the book itself, the Kings of the Heartland character almanac, all the rules that would be in that free PDF. You can, again, free PDF, all you can download. You could be playing the game right now. Like, I'm not doing any direct things from what we did when we were kids, but like, for example, in almost every one of my campaigns, there's an old knight named Lubert Van Daren, and Lubert is an important character in this mythos as well. He is not the same Lubert from before or from like any of the thousands of offshoots of him I've made, but he is there in spirit. And that is essentially what all of it is. The entire story is the spirit of these old games. And my the guy who helped me make them is also a writing partner on the project. Mainly the project is just me and my wife, with me writing and art and her doing the editing. But this guy is, I guess the best thing I could say is he's a creative consultant, because he is also the creator. He's one of the creators of the world. So whenever I want to do something like real drastically changing to the lore we've made, I do talk to him first.
You're talking about Mikey, right?
Yes. Kid Max, actually, yes. Go to his Twitch, Kid Maximum at twitch.tv. He streams sometimes.
So can you talk a little bit about the campaign setting? What's the story?
Well, I guess it's appropriate that I'm dressed like George R.R. Martin, because it is not really heavily inspired by A Song of Fire and Ice, because I've never read those books, and I have much like everyone else, a love-hate relationship with that show. But we draw from a lot of the same inspirations. I know George R.R. Martin was a big fan of European history and the Tudors and all that. And I like to use that as a backdrop for what is essentially just Lovecraftian horror, straight up. I know there's a little bit of that in George R. R. Martin's work, but I would say that I'm more inspired by Hidetaka Miyazaki of the Dark Souls series, someone who takes from Lovecraft and Moria and a bunch of other people, and then just it's like, oh, this is a medieval setting, but everything is goopy and horrible. But as far as the setting goes, I have 3 adventure paths essentially planned for the setting, 2 adventures each. One in which you are just straight up fighting monsters. Another, you're dealing with more of the political intrigue. And the other one is a little more corporeal. You're like dirty, feet on the ground soldiers killing other people.
And why should people back this Kickstarter?
Because I think I've made something significantly different from other systems, but still holds true to the principles that we all know as tabletop gamers. It won't be hard to learn, but it'll feel different than most other things you've played. It is setting agnostic, so you can it's easy to make your own things in. So if you don't want to back the Kickstarter, you already have the tools you need to do that. So just the sign of good faith there that system first. It's system first. And in the future, I do plan, if this is successful, I do plan to make more settings for it. So if you don't like fantasy, I'm going to have a sci-fi, well, dystopian sci-fi setting. Let's be fair here. I'm a depressing person. A dystopian sci-fi setting, a true gothic horror setting, and one of my friends who's helped me playtest this he keeps pressing a prehistoric setting because he thinks that the system might work for that, and I play with that idea. You know, I like punching prehistoric animals occasionally. It'd be nice to play a guy with a club killing a saber-toothed tiger.
And what will Kickstarter backers get by supporting you?
Well, first of all, my deep and unending gratitude. The Kickstarter's goal is to make a core rulebook and to a prologue adventure and produce one of the primary adventures. This will be the Wardens of Blight campaign, where you take the role of noble knights or prisoners fighting against a festering bog in the south that seems to be spawning demons. Mainly what we're focusing on is a core rulebook which encompasses all of the Ultimo rules as well as new rules for this setting. The one that I'm really pitching here is a robust settlement and fortress building system. I want that to be a big part of how this game works, is like paint the world with your own paintbrush, and the only way to really do that is buildings, honestly. So that system, some specific skills for the setting, armor, weapons, all that makes sense in the setting, a compendium of manuals and different magical items, a character almanac, tips for DMs on how to create adventures, magical items, and quest hooks, maps, the map of the world, and a bestiary. That's the last one, bestiary. My brain fully forgot about that one. That's real important because you need monsters to fight.